Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and this is the Education Show, and I am delighted to be here today with Jill Tucker from the San Francisco Chronicle. Jill, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
This is a great opportunity for us to talk about all things San Francisco schools because there was a big strike last week, and you were covering it along with a bunch of other people.
Yes.
Before we jump into the strike, for folks who might not know, who are you and what do you do?
So I am Jill Tucker. I am the education writer here at the San Francisco Chronicle. I have been covering education, and I hesitate to say this every time, for almost 30 years in California. I started when I was 5. So I've been doing this a long time at the San Francisco Chronicle and other papers prior to that. I love covering education. It is never dull. But I'm still lacking sleep even after a 3-day weekend after covering the strike. So yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that we're talking. I'm so glad that you're there. I'm a big fan of your work, as you know, and I appreciate your help in making the grade a success.
Oh, thank you.
Is it true, perhaps the last full time K 12 education reporter in the Bay Area, or do I just think of you as the only one?
You just think of me as the only one. There are actually a lot of full-time education writers still in the Bay Area. They're at some of the local online publications. We have publications like Oakland Side and Richmond Side, and in fact, EdSource is located in Oakland, and that is an entire online publication that covers California, full of some of the most talented education writers that I've ever met. And so they're all full-time Oakland or full-time education writers. There are still education writers, the San Jose Mercury News and those folks. But yes, there are a lot fewer of us for sure.
And locally, by which I mean San Francisco proper, there's Mission Local. They cover education sometimes, but to my understanding, they don't have a person. KQED used to have a whole team, but they don't anymore.
They still have folks that are covering education regularly. Whether their title is education reporter, I'm not 100% sure, but they do have talented people that understand education well and are typically the ones that are covering education. The Standard has an education reporter, Ezra, who is typically on education. Joe Fitzgerald, he covers education as well. Whether they also cover other things, but so do I. You know, I'm often on wildfires and whatever else is happening. So even though my title is education writer, so we do it all, right? I mean, we all do it all. But Ezra and Joe are often on education, and they were both covering the strike, as was I.
Right. Before we talk about the coverage, can you tell folks who weren't following, don't know anything, maybe think they don't care at all, what happened and how did it turn out?
Yeah, so I mean, this was a pretty historic strike. It was the first teacher strike in San Francisco since 1979. And for those of you who don't want to do the math, that's almost 50 years. And that's a lot, because in neighboring communities like Oakland, they've had a lot of strikes in recent years. And, and so it really was an issue that came down to, like most strikes, wages, salaries, health benefits, as well as some other things like special education services, even AI, also immigrant services, housing, student housing. There's a lot of things thrown in there. It lasted 4 days, which felt like an eternity. And the previous strike in 1979 lasted almost 7 weeks. So this was relatively short, but it did feel like an eternity. They settled it very, very early Friday morning, and with, I would say, leaning toward what the union wanted. But there was definitely compromises. But it was a $183 million package, which is a lot of money for districts in California that are the vast majority have budget deficits, including San Francisco. So the
And,
story is not done for sure.
and the $183 million, that's the estimated cost, additional cost of the agreed to provisions in the contract.
Yeah, first year annual cost for the provisions in the contract. Yes, it's still estimated. They're still looking at it,
Right.
but that was the estimate right after they agreed to the tentative
Right.
terms.
Looking back to last week, I was following along last week. You were actually doing work and producing coverage. Looking back, just from the broadest perspective that you can manage, what is your overall take on the coverage that you produced and that you saw? Was there enough? Was it good? Should we be generally pleased by the quality and the quantity of the coverage, or did you see a lot of issues?
Well, I mean, I'll speak to my own coverage. I think, I will say just to start with, covering strikes is my least favorite thing to do in education reporting. It is highly, highly emotional. And as a journalist, when you're trying to cover things fairly and with balance and accurately, when everything coming at you in a fire hose is emotional, and a lot of that is anger and frustration and all the emotions, it makes it very difficult to cover. You really have to get behind that. I mean, obviously you have to cover some of that, but you're really trying to get at what is happening, what are the real issues, what is the real impact on families and students, what is happening behind closed doors, which obviously we can't be there. So it really is my least favorite thing to cover, because children are not typically not in school, even if schools are open, which they weren't in San Francisco. Many parents don't send their kids. They don't want to cross the picket line, or there isn't enough staff. So it is a lot of drama, and I think the temptation is to cover the drama rather than the real issues in education that are behind that drama, um, and get at what the meaning of all of this is. Um, and that's hard. That is really, really hard to do, because it's an ever changing thing. And now in this digital world that we're living in, the stories that I was writing, I was updating dozens of times a day, trying to figure out what was the most recent proposal, what was the counter proposal, what was happening. Did they think there was going to be an agreement? What would be the impact of that proposal? What did it mean to the budget? What was happening on the strike lines? What was happening, to parents? Were they getting childcare? Was the city services that they promised happening? So it was a lot of juggling all of the issues that matter to families and children and officials that were in the negotiating, and were they negotiating, and who was not negotiating, and who walked out. And so it was a lot. It's a lot of keeping track of a lot of different people, essentially almost 24 hours a day, and which is exhausting. And I think the temptation sometimes is to go for the easy pickings, if you will,
Mhm.
in terms of what people are feeding you, or what stories, what sources you
Right.
can get. It can be hard to go out in the field when you're trying to get the information. So thankfully, I had some other reporters that went out in the field for me to do some of the field reporting on the strike
Right.
lines. But yeah, it's a lot, and I think it does take experience. I've covered a lot of strikes, so that you can kind of parse out where you are in this, and where to turn down the noise, so that you can actually do the solid reporting. Sorry,
Let's
that
look
was
at
long winded, but
no, no, no. Listen, you've got a lot to say, and it's good stuff that you're saying. Can we talk a little bit more about the emotional heightening issue? Because this comes up a lot, whether it's school closings, strikes, COVID, school culture issues, all the things. If I understood you correctly, what you were saying is that it's important not to end up just covering the heightened emotions. The issue that I keep thinking about when I see the coverage is that it's a challenge, not also to take on the emotions or cover it. It there's an excitement to a strike, right? I mean,
Hmm.
people are protesting, and there's lots of righteous indignation and finger wagging and things like that. Um, how do you pivot away from just covering the emotions and focusing on what's important? And also, how do you avoid sort of taking on the getting a little strike fever as a journalist?
Yeah. Well, I think it helps if you've covered them before, because you know what's coming, and you already can kind of separate yourself and brace yourself.
Right,
Um, so that for me was part of it. Um, but it can be hard because journalists get dragged into it for sure. I mean, we are vilified, or we are used, or we are, the emails that we get trying to drag us into one side or the other. The angry emails or the messages on Twitter, X, um, are nasty, because we did not take one side or the other in our stories. So it can be really difficult, and I think that there are, if you have kids in school, or if um, have friends that are teachers, as many of us do, it can be really hard to sort of set aside your personal feelings or your
right,
thoughts about the whole thing, and not get dragged into the emotions, especially when you're really tired.
right,
You just want it to end, and you're like, but that's our job. That's our job no
right.
matter what we're covering, whether it's a wildfire, whether it's scandal, whether it's a police shooting, it doesn't matter. And so I think that, we all have to take that breath, and thank goodness in what I call um, ethical checks and balances media, we have editors who backstop us and make sure that we are um, keeping it together, if you will, and keeping that balance, keeping that accuracy, so it's a team. It's a team effort, to ensure that all of that is happening throughout the entire coverage. At the Chronicle, we have copy editors still. I have multiple editors that are looking over my shoulder and helping plan out the stories that we're doing. And so that is incredibly helpful, to make sure that when I'm at my most exhausted, somebody's there.
Speaking of copy editors, I don't know if she's still there, but for a long time, Carolyn Grannon used to weigh in on Twitter on education issues left and right. Do you know Caroline?
I do, of course I do. And her husband, Steve Rubenstein, who is my buddy, he's retired now, and he is substitute teaching in San Francisco, and he was on the strike line along with Carol.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what you
And
did.
she was actually not allowed to edit my stories
Oh,
because she
interesting.
was,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, because
Um,
she was very vocal about her opinions. Yeah. That's
she
how
was.
checks and balances we are here.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
What was the best thing that you did? The best story, the best tidbit you unearthed? What was the best thing you did last week? What was the worst thing? If there was anything you did that you're not so happy about, and was there anything that you didn't get to do that you desperately wish you could have done?
Yeah, I think we did some Q&As that typically, I wasn't a fan of those in the past, because there's not a lot of there's not a lot of people in them, or feeling, or it doesn't take a lot of writing chops, and they're just basic information type stuff. But I will say that I'm increasingly a fan of them, especially for things like this, especially for things that are emotional and have a lot going on very quickly. because they really sum up exactly what is happening. And
Are you
it
talking about
gives
a,
our
sorry to interrupt. Are you talking about a Q&A or a FAQ kind of thing?
this I call it, they're both, but I do them as Q&As where I write my own question based on what people are
Got it.
talking about and the questions that they're actually asking me either through
Got it.
email or on Twitter or whatever, and then I answer them. So it's an FAQ, but it's in a Q&A format.
Right.
And I do it in a conversational tone, so it's really accessible and really simplified, without the edu-speak gobbledygook that
Mhm.
they often are seeing in the press conferences and other things. And it really
And
just breaks down. So I broke down after the tentative agreement exactly what that meant, what were the terms, and what that would look like, and were layoffs possible? Just a lot of that background information so the average person could just really, really grasp what was happening. And we did
right.
that at the beginning of the strike. Like, what did this mean? Schools were closed. What did that mean? So just really giving readers that basic information that just did not seem very clear. And the feedback that I got on that, from public officials, people who were um, previous labor folks at the table, and people that had been on school boards, and a lot of other, and parents and other people, just saying thank you, I finally get what some of these terms mean, and what
Right.
this stuff means.
Right.
And that's that really makes you feel good, like you're finally helping them understand some of the complicated stuff. Um, and um, and then I felt like I think just in general that my coverage was really balanced. It was really calling out, both sides in terms of where they were, what they were doing, what was happening at the table as far as we could see. I think the funniest thing, the thing that I got, at one point, was the union they were having their huge rally, and one of the union officials said, we've been waiting at the table for hours and the district isn't there. And then I called the district and said, hey, are you guys at the table? And they said, we've been at the table for hours and the union isn't there. And I was like, are you guys in the same building? Like, I literally had to ask her if they were in the same building. And so both sides at the same moment were saying, we've been at the table for hours and we're waiting for the other side. And
And
it
were
was,
you able to report that out?
yes. So I reported. Went back to the union and said, "Hey, your vice president just said over the microphone that they weren't at the table, and the district is saying that you're not at the table. I'm reporting this. Went asked for comment from both sides." And it was really one of those things that just demonstrated the rhetoric, the crazy, and I put in, and as I put it out on X, you know, at with the story in there, just saying I literally had to ask if they were in the same building.
Right.
And because number one, I thought it was funny and depressing at the same time.
Right.
But it really exposed the ridiculousness and the rhetoric and
And the attempts
just
to manipulate.
yeah, the manipulation and the who's telling the truth. And I had people going, well, one of them is lying, and I'm like, well, that would I would assume, or both. I don't know. You're just like, I don't know who's there
Right.
in the room. I don't know.
Right.
But obviously this is dumb. This isn't about the kids at all. And that to me shows that these strikes and the bargaining and all of that rhetoric that you're hearing is not when they're saying we need to act with urgency. Well, are you really acting with urgency? So those are
Right.
the types of things that I love reporting on in these is really pointing out either the hypocrisy or the really pressuring them to really exposing the where the truth is and where the um, exaggeration or the manipulation is, I guess. Yeah.
Was there anything that you did that you either spent a lot of time on and didn't pan out, or a story or an angle that you pursued that, in retrospect, doesn't seem important or useful or constructive?
Um, no, I mean, well, I spent a great deal of my time, trying to figure out where they were and when they were going to get a settlement, where the proposals were. And I had colleagues doing more of the field work and helping out with, how the families were doing. City hall reporters working on sort of what the mayor was doing or what city services were out there.
Right.
Um, I I was really pushing for more coverage in communities that are often not fully reported during strikes. They're more hidden. They're harder to get to. They're harder to find. They're harder to uncover what's really happening to some of the most disadvantaged students and families. And I was really pushing for more of that coverage from some of our reporters that have more access into those communities. And I think had the strike gone on longer, we would have done that more. Um, our this came on the heels of the Super Bowl, so our staff was really, really limited in terms of heading into the strike, and so it was a matter of staffing. It was a matter of um, trying to prioritize where coverage was. But I think that was the one thing in strikes is really covering what is happening to the most vulnerable students and families. And as I said, this was 4 days, so not a super long time to really get at that because you're trying to figure out in the first 2 days what's happening,
Hmm.
and then the next 2 days they go by very quickly. Trying to find those sources or trying to get access is difficult. So, the window was very short in this case. But I think that is my regret in these types of situations is that we're not fully covering those communities as well as we should.
Right. And from my perspective, uh, behind a keyboard, I don't have to do the work. I always wish that those stories came earlier rather than later. That a strike didn't have to last a week or longer for the stories to get out into the community, so to speak. I sort of wish
Mhm.
that that was like the first thing rather than the last thing. But again, I'm just sitting here yelling at the clouds. You and your colleagues are the ones who actually have to pull it off. The the one thing that I was looking for, and maybe it was there and I just didn't see it from you and the Chronicle team and other outlets. I didn't get the sense that anyone had any particularly good inside access. Is that
Inside
true?
access to where?
To the main the sides, the teachers and the district. It didn't feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it may also not be the most important thing in the world, but uh, each side is making decisions about what to do and when and why. And in some cases, both either during or shortly thereafter a strike, journalists are able to either in real time or afterwards sort of help people understand the series of decisions and sometimes the mistakes that people made tactically or strategically. Um, did you have enough of an inside view of things that were going on internally? Would you even bother doing a story about why it ended up that there was a strike and who did what when, sort of a political TikTok?
Yeah, yes. I think we have reported to a certain degree that the strike was almost inevitable because of the statewide teachers union and their campaign to have a few dozen districts um, negotiating at the same time and at impasse at the same time, and so to a certain degree, this strike did feel almost inevitable, but it wasn't. You never know, right? What is going to happen and how this is all going to play out. San Diego, for example, that was one of the districts that was part of this campaign, and it was also feeling pretty inevitable. But then they had a 1 day strike settled, and then they canceled that. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to fully have an agreement and it's going to, that they won't go on strike. It's not 100% sure, I don't think yet, but uh, a lot of these strikes are feeling inevitable, Los Angeles, et cetera. And so I think in terms of sort of the Monday morning quarterbacking that we're seeing, that we saw over the weekend and we're seeing now, I don't know that a lot of that is fully accurate. There's a lot of second guessing. There's a lot of those things that are going on. I think there was a lot of effort in the days before the strike, a lot of negotiating, a lot of that type of stuff happening, um, and a lot of a lot of rhetoric. I mean, people say a lot of things.
They do. But
Politicians say a
basically,
lot of things.
yeah.
So what do you believe? What is actually true? Um, what is off the record? What is on the record? So you are, you're operating from a place as usual of having to take what they say on the record um, and report that. And you can try to uncover what is actually happening in the background.
Mhm.
But, and we have reported that the strike appeared, they've been voting for this. They have been supporting it. They have not been coming to any terms. But you can't report that it's going to happen. You can prepare people,
Mhm.
through all of my sources, every few hours in the week leading up to it, as I said, I wasn't getting any sleep for a long time before. um, what's happening, is there a deal? What do you think? What are the odds? Trying to get any sense of where this was headed, if there was any chance,
Mhm.
who was behind the scenes, who was trying to prevent it, who was involved, who was making phone calls. Not all that's on the record. You can't make people, a lot of times they don't want to share what's happening.
Right.
So yeah, it's hard because you may know to a certain degree what's happening, but it isn't necessarily, um, they're playing a game behind the scenes. They don't, these are politicians who need support for upcoming elections, and
Yeah.
it's all of the above. A TikTok after the fact, we may do some of that this week, um, but it is.
Especially if there are any loose ends or major myths or misconceptions about the outcome. You got to some of those in your Q&A, but there's certainly some more. Let me ask a couple more coverage related questions, both about the strike and about strike coverage in general. What's your view on coverage of protests that go to people's homes or who report on people's personal lives? Uh, where they send their kids to school, etc. Do you cover that stuff? Do you think it's something that the paper should cover or other papers should cover? What's your take on that?
Um, I did not cover those things. I think it's a question of ethics for each paper or each outlet. Um, So that is something that each publication probably needs to decide on their own.
But that's something that you don't do. And does the paper not do, the Chronicle not do, or do other journalists at the paper do that? That's just something that you personally don't think is
We did not cover those things, um, but it I think it is a question of what is news and what goal does what goal does that story achieve in the middle of a strike? Who is it serving? And like all news judgment, what is the purpose of the story?
yeah.
And so we make decisions during a strike, just as we always do, on those types of topics. So if
There
you're
was
going to report on whether public officials send their children to public school, um, if you're doing that in the middle of a strike or at any other time, what would be the purpose of that news? And does it have news value? Is it newsworthy? We would ask all those questions.
one of the things I've seen in other places, I guess I'm thinking of Chicago right now, is coverage of teachers or educators who cross picket lines in order to serve kids. Sort of reporting out on some of the social and professional pressures and dynamics that educators go through during a strike. Um, and the related issue in San Francisco that I saw mentioned, I don't know if anyone actually reported it out fully, was the teachers apparently asking parents not to do the packets. Was that something either the line crossing teacher or the parent who wants or needs their kid to do the packet? Was that something that you covered or wished you'd covered?
Yeah, I looked into that. It it appeared to be so. I asked. We asked the union and we asked the district about this. We never got very clear answers. It was on social media. It was posted on social media. It looked like, based on what I was seeing, I was looking for documentation of this, that if it was happening, it was isolated to one teacher or one school or something like this. The union was not taking responsibility, saying that they were advocating for this. The district, in their response, wasn't addressing it directly, and because I could not get
Right.
specific uh, documentation, and I couldn't get parents on the record for it because they were fearing retribution. And normally we could use anonymous sources for that. But because I couldn't get anybody on the record for it, and I couldn't get enough documentation to show that it wasn't isolated, that it was more than just one teacher or one school or something along those
Right.
lines.
So
Um,
just to,
I
so
I
just to make
feared.
sure I understand,
Yeah, go
sorry to
ahead.
interrupt, but just to make sure I understand. So there wasn't independent confirmation that the teachers writ large had asked parents not to do this, not to participate in the independent study. Um, uh,
Correct.
but there was evidence that the district had asked parents to do independent study, right? That was not controversial.
They had packets available for students to do during the strike.
Right.
They have an independent study agreement
Mhm.
that parents can sign. It's one that students and parents can use at all times. It's kind of a generic long-term or whatever independent study. It's not really based on a strike.
Mhm.
It's kind of a typically longer term or something like that. But if the parent signed it, then the district could get funding. If the students completed it, turned it in, they could get funding for the packets.
Right. This
Um,
is like a remote day in the East Coast or in the
Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
is like a
So
remote day versus a snow day kind of situation.
yeah, although they didn't have remote instructions, but if they completed the packet of work and it was determined that they did enough hours of work, the school district could get funding for that time. It was voluntary. It was not mandatory in any way. If the parents wanted to sign it and the student completed the packet, then the district could determine if enough education and work was done to get to submit to the state for funding. Um, but the what I heard was there were random teachers or some teachers perhaps saying that if you did that, then you could lengthen the strike and you would be essentially crossing the picket line. Um, and other
Okay,
parents
just
were angry that signing the agreement, like the district didn't tell them that they would get money, and so there was a lot of misinformation going around. And some people said don't take the packets, or that teachers were telling them not to take the packets. Other parents were telling other parents not to take the packet. It was a lot of weird misinformation or weird rumors going around.
mhm,
And so it was, but from my understanding, or at least from our reporting, the union itself, the leaders of the union, teacher leaders did not. I couldn't verify that they were supporting this. I couldn't verify from the
mhm,
district that they had any information
right,
about that. And so for me, it without that confirmation, without
right,
documentation, I didn't want to report it.
right. Or without some sort of a strong disavowal from the teachers, one way or the other, right? You're sort of
Correct.
stuck. Yeah,
Yeah, and I did not want to fuel that.
yeah,
If it was isolated to one teacher or a few teachers, and have it become a scandal in the middle of the strike, when that it was fueling this weird emotional thing, and I
yeah.
didn't want to contribute to that if I did not have the actual goods to report on it.
Looking towards the future, it sounds like I hadn't known about the campaign that you described, and if that's something you've covered, I'm going to see if I can get the link from you after we close up here. It sounds like there are going to be more strikes, and you're going to have more sleepless nights. What do you think? What do you think happens next, or what are you going to be focusing on or covering next when it comes to um, labor relations in schools?
Well, we'll still be covering San Francisco and how this all shakes out as we get more information on the tentative agreement and the financial impact of that. San Francisco has, or excuse me, California has a law that requires districts to issue preliminary pink slips by March 15th. It doesn't mean they're going to stay, but they have to at least notice
Right, right,
teachers and others if they could be laid off. So they're going to have to be making decisions very, very soon if this has an impact on that. Or if there are going to be strikes and they may have to give raises in the future, they're going to have to issue these pink slips just in case. And so we're going to be following that and the impact of any of these labor negotiations might have on those. But there are many districts that are Berkeley Unified and Oakland are in the middle of their impasse in mediation and fact finding, which are the final phases before they can legally call a strike. Of course, they can go on strike for a uniform labor complaint at any time, but which Oakland has done. But for the actual contract strike, they're in the final phases. Oakland, their last day of fact finding for the panel is today. If they do not come to an agreement, which I do not expect them to do, then the fact finders go off and they write a report, as they did in San Francisco. That should come back within the next 2 weeks or less. And then once they get the report in their hands, literally, as they did in San Francisco, they can call a strike, giving notice of 48 hours. So I believe that we could see a strike in Oakland by the end of the month, maybe. and I am not looking forward to that. Strikes in Oakland are even more emotional than they are in San Francisco. And so it's possible we could see another one in Berkeley. I'm not sure when, maybe March, and then others across the state. It's the many outlets have written about sort of this statewide campaign. It was a little bit upended by Trump's win and the funding issues that districts have had to deal with. I think the idea was to raise awareness of funding of schools in California, and the expiration of a tax that has funded schools, tax on the wealthy, statewide, and as well as maybe a reform of Prop 13, which is, for those who don't know, it limits increases to property taxes, and has had a great effect on funding for education and funding across the state. So, but that has been sort of upended, and yet we're still seeing these coordinated contracts and strikes happening at the same time. So it's a really tenuous time in California right now for education, especially at local district levels, where everybody's sort of feeling this, I don't know, emboldenment to a certain degree for these labor agreements, and to really press school districts, which are already strapped for cash and in deficit mode. San Francisco has a
Right.
state advisor that is looking over their shoulder for spending. So yeah, it's a lot
Yeah,
right
it's definitely a lot. The secondary effect of all the strikes is that it helps limit the governor's interest or ability in running for national office, right? It makes things very complicated for him. One last question, and thank you so much for explaining all this and sharing your expertise. A lot of education journalism organizations, newsrooms, et cetera, and education reporters left Twitter a while back, and you're still on. Why are you still on Twitter?
um I think it's important to be places that are uncomfortable. I think it's important to hear different points of view. I also think it's good marketing for my stories. We are still in an industry that is, it's tough out there. But the reality is, I have control over, of blocking people or muting people, and I used to be very, I didn't block people because I thought that would, they should have access, and I realized that was dumb. And so I now block people who are abusive or harass me. And so I'm very careful, and I also am very careful with my mental health in regards to Twitter. And I will, not look. I'll shut it down. I'll post my stories. I don't post anything personal there. It is a work only uh, thing for the most part. I it is what it is. It is a workplace tool, and that's what I keep it as. And so for me, it isn't a personal thing. It isn't a. It's just where I post stories, and I will. I may comment on education related topics,
Mhm.
but it is a workplace tool.
Interesting. Jill Tucker from the San Francisco Chronicle, thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh, thank you. And for all the education reporters out there, if you're covering a strike, hang in there. Do your best, and yeah, just
And call Jill for advice.
yeah, feel free to message me. Yeah, if you need to, or just to vent. But I'm a big fan of a little bit of bourbon at the end of the day.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Excellent.